Listen to Stu's Wrestling Podcast wherever podcasts are found.
You're listening to Stu's Wrestling Podcast. It's time. Your host, Stu Palmer.
A warm welcome. This is episode 166 of Stu's Wrestling Podcast, and it's been 5 years since I started the show in 2019, and I've got a guest all the way from the good old US of A on the East Coast in America. It is a long-time veteran referee of 32 years in pro wrestling from WWE and NWA. It's Mr. Dave Dwinell, all the way from the good old US of A. How are we, Dave?
Good morning, Stu, and I do mean morning because it is morning here, but I'm so happy to be with you, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be part of your broadcast.
Not a problem. Anytime. And it's been great. Obviously, off camera, you've sent me some stuff about your career, and I just can't wait to ask you. And I wish I could have you for 3 hours, Dave, but obviously time constraints and stuff of that nature. But yeah, getting your start as a referee in the business, and yeah, I'd just love to hear about the origins of you becoming, dressed in the zebra and having so many years in the business.
Well, I'm not a name that's going to be recognizable instantly, as many referees are not. I never refereed full time. I was a state official when I started out, and I always had a full-time job. But I worked afternoons, evenings, weekends. I would travel with the independents in the summer, worked the East Coast with the WWF back from 1982 to 2000 when they deregulated. And I really enjoyed refereeing. And of course, kayfabe was in those days. So the referee's job was a little bit harder than I think some of the refs today. But I'm glad to share any and all stories I have or any questions you might have for me.
I've always got plenty of questions for my guests. I tell you, not a problem. I'll have plenty to ask you. Yeah, just getting into WWF at the time, and I know you got to see guys, who became huge stars. You ref matches for the likes of Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. The list goes on. So yeah, starting out, their careers and early on in their careers when you got to officiate their matches, and could you have foreseen how stratospheric those guys were going to be in the business at the time?
Certain wrestlers, yes. I had a chance to work many of the very, very first matches of people. I think I worked the Ultimate Warrior's 9th match after he came into the WWF, which it was at the time. People like Bret Hart, who I know is one of your favorites,
Absolutely.
was part of the Hart Foundation with Jim Neidhart, his brother-in-law, and Triple H's first match in Madison Square Garden when he was going under the moniker of Hunter Hearst Helmsley. I was the young referee at the time, and these guys were not the top liners on the show. The Undertaker I worked with very early on. What happened was I was the new ref, and the old refs would go, "You're going to take this new team tonight, the Hart Foundation, because we want to do the main eventers." It might have been some of the older wrestlers at the time. So I had a chance to work with many of the future superstars very early in their career, and people like Kurt Hennig and Bam Bam Bigelow. I worked basically his first or second public match when he was training with Larry Sharp's school, the Monster Factory in New Jersey. We're at a high school, and Bam Bam came in and said, "Boy, I'm nervous working in front of this large crowd." And there was about 200 people there. And, after the match, he said, I thought it was going to be a terrible match. I saw his size and I said, "Oh, this is going to be awful." After the match, he said, "How did I do?" I said, "You better not forget me when you become famous." There were certain people you could see. I worked for Yokozuna I worked Yokozuna matches with his Uncle Office promotion in Allentown, Pennsylvania, when he first started as Coquina Maximus. And the size of him and his agility at the time, I could not believe. I said, this man's... So there were certain people you would see and you just knew that they were going to go somewhere. Curt Hennig was a phenomenal worker. You could see it. I worked some of his first matches with the WWF, and I said to myself, this guy's going someplace.
Unbelievable what he was able to do. Do you know what, as well, Dave? As a young kid, watching from 1990, I went back to the 80s, obviously, as well. But Curt Hennig, as much as he was a heel, I respected him even when I was a kid. You're meant to gravitate to all the baby faces, and I hated most heels, but there was just something magnetic about Curt Hennig across the screen that ordinarily as a kid, you're meant to hate him. I hated Ted DiBiase and people like that, but that was the power of him. I think just what he was able to do in the ring, even when I was a young, impressionable kid, that came across.
Well, his father was a famous wrestler, Larry the Axe Hennig, and he was carrying on a family tradition. And he just totally impressed me with the way he worked when he came into the WWF. He could really work a terrific match as a wrestler. He could really wrestle. You could tell he had been trained well.
Absolutely.
I think he was trained by was it Vern Gagne, or I'm not sure who trained him, but he was trained well.
You would assume so, wouldn't you, with obviously his AWA ties prior to WWF? You would assume Vern had a hand in him.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, like I said, I was very fortunate to work matches with a lot of people who did go on. I called myself the Alpha and Omega referee because I got a lot of the stars when they came up. And then when they left the WWE and worked on the independent circuit, I worked for 2 or 3 major independents in the U.S. And at a time when independents had stars, the WWF would allow their wrestlers to work independent shows to pick up extra money because they weren't making a lot of money back in the 80s and 90s. So I had a chance to work on them when they came in. I had a chance to work on them when they left. WWF. So I called myself the Alpha Omega, beginning and end. I literally had Yokozuna's next to last match.
Wow.
In the Heroes of Wrestling, which is something I don't necessarily enjoy talking about, but if you want to later on, we can. It was the lowest rated pay-per-view of all times.
Right, okay, which I didn't know. You're teaching me stuff here.
Are you familiar with the Heroes of Wrestling?
I've got to be honest, as well versed as I am as a fan on stuff, you've hit me with something I didn't know, and this is the beauty of doing this show. I love you guys teaching me.
Well, this is not the beauty for me because it's
no, of course.
What I'd like to forget, but we could talk about that a little later, why it was memorable, because actually it was the first time I ever went into a ring with no finish. The guy who was going to take the pin, Jim Neidhart, was going to take the pin in the main event. This is live. This is live in front of a live audience being televised as a pay-per-view. And we're getting ready to go in the ring, and it's about a minute before the match. And Jim Neidhart says, I'm going back with Vince. Vince called me and doesn't want me to take the pin. I said, okay, so what's the finish? He goes, I don't know. So we went into the ring. It was Bundy and Yokozuna. No, Bundy was with Jake Roberts, who unfortunately was not in very good condition that night. And it was Jim Neidhart and Bundy. And we had no finish. It was live TV. So I told Bundy, look, throw me out of the ring. I'm going to pretend I'm hurt. Maybe some other ref can deal with this. And Bundy said, don't worry about it. Now, Bundy, the heels weren't supposed to go over. Bundy knocked Jake down, fell on him, and said, count. So I counted to 3, or we might still be there today. And so I counted to 3, and they were not the legal men in the ring. But I didn't care if Bundy pinned me at that point in time. I counted to 3, and so I've taken a lot of heat since then on the internet about what a horrible referee. This guy counted to 3 on guys that weren't even illegal men in the ring. And my answer was always, well, I kind of got confused during the match. And I, what can I say? I got confused and I counted to 3 on the wrong guys, but I certainly didn't. And like I say, we might still be there now if I hadn't. So, if you have a chance, look at it.
I will. Now
do not eat before. Do not eat before you
Right.
look at
Okay.
it.
I'll keep myself.
They had a lot of. See, it was an oldies wrestling show. They had a wrestling show with all guys that unfortunately were past their prime, and it just didn't come off, and they never ran again. So I felt kind of bad for the promoter because he put a lot of stock and money into it. But such is life. You have the good and the bad.
Absolutely. And calling it on the fly, Dave, to try and get to the ending. That's just you think the booker, the promoter would have sorted all that out with the boys beforehand, surely, at an event like that. And as you say, in a live environment as well. Why was it not organized?
Well, it was organized, but at the last minute, Neidhart said he refused to take the pin, and he only told me, no one else.
And
he was going to take the pin. It was determined he was going to take the pin from Yokozuna. And he said, I'm not, because Vince called me and said, I'm going back, and I can't take the pin. So I said, well, what's the finish? He goes, I don't know. So it's the only time in my career, only one other time. I was doing Jerry Lawler against Mick Foley, and they decided to have fun with me. It was on an independent show. So they decided they were going to do every finishing hold of every famous wrestler in the business, and I had to figure out which one was the actual pin. They wouldn't tell me, and so I had to figure out. My hand was red. We did about 15 false finishes, and finally the pin came. And one other time too, Doink and Bigelow, Ray Liccamelli was the final Doink, and he has the right to use it today. There he is. He's the one with the clown face on. and him and Bigelow were very, very good friends. And they would change the finish on me. They'd say Doink's going over, and Bigelow would go over, but they wouldn't tell me. And he would constantly rub that grease paint in my new referee shirt for the night, and that stuff doesn't come out. And I wanted to just, he was just a character. We're really, really good friends. But the first time I worked with him, we were roommates at the hotel. And I looked at him before I went in the room, and I said, if you sleep with that damn clown face on, I do not like clowns. If you sleep with that clown face on, I'm going to get up and have a cardiac arrest. He goes, no, I don't sleep with the clown face.
Luckily for you.
Yeah.
Amazing. Just the amount of guys you've got to work with as well. And obviously you've kindly sent me photos prior to this episode. And I'm obviously going to fire some of these up because I'm going way back. We're going into the 70s now, Dave. And the great Bruno Sammartino, WWE Hall of Famer. Just your time with Bruno spent in the ring, I'd love to hear about that because the man's a legend. I was there for his Hall of Fame induction back in 2013 as well.
Well, I actually refereed Bruno in the early 80s. He came out of retirement for one or two matches from time to time. He might fill in for an injured wrestler. He might have replaced his son, who, if you remember, left kind of drastically. And at any rate, I heard he was on the show that night, and I never asked the athletic commission because in those days, the WWF had to use state officials. They could not use their own officials. They had to use us. They were stuck with us. And I asked the commission, I said, and actually I asked Arnold Skolin, who Arnold and his wife, Betty, were the promoters of the show in White Plains, New York, near where I lived. And I used to get most of those shows every 6 weeks. And I went to Arnie and I said, I got to have the Bruno match. He was my hero growing up. And I got to have, so I got the Bruno match. And I needed a picture when I raised his hand. So I saw someone, there were no phones like cell phones or phones that had cameras in those days. So the guy had a camera in the front row, a zoom lens. I said, if Bruno wins, will you take the picture? He goes, sure. So I get in the ring, and of course, Bruno wins. So I raised his hand, but I was on the opposite side of the ring. So I said, Bruno, you got to come with me. And I walked him all the way around the ring. And he looked at me like, are we on television? And I said, no, but I'll explain in the locker room. He said, where are we going? I said, over here. So when we got back to the locker room, I told him, and he started laughing. And he probably said, this guy's as much a fan as he is a ref. And for that match, I probably was, because being in a ring with him and Cowboy Bob Orton, Randy Orton's father, phenomenal match. Randy Bob got counted out. But if I could, I'll tell a few little stories about Bruno.
Of course you can. There's plenty of time. I'd love to hear the stories about Bruno. Of course I would. You got to know.
Well, I first met Bruno. He didn't know me. I was a 15-year-old kid at the Worcester Memorial Auditorium watching a match with him against in the 60s with him against Prince Curtis Iakia, King of Curtis Iakia. Mm-hmm. And I looked around at the show. I was 15. My brother was about 12 or 13. And I looked around. We were the only kids there. There were mostly blue-collar workers, smoking, drinking. Couldn't see the ring with the smoke by the time the main event came in because of the smoke. And I watched Bruno work. And I'd always wanted to beat him, and I was sorry I couldn't that night. But a year or so later, I went to the New York World's Fair, and I found out he was appearing at the Budweiser beer tent. And he would do an exhibition of carrying 2 quarter kegs on his shoulders around the lot for people to see. So I said, I'm going to wait till everybody leaves, and I'm going to go over and talk to him, because he was WWF champion, of course, at the time. So everybody left. I went over. That man spent 8 minutes talking to me. Now, what wrestler will spend 8 minutes talking to you? Okay. So I figured it's the only chance I'm ever going to have to see him. Well, here we are about 20 years later, and I'm sharing the ring with him. And we had a chance after an independent show that that we went out and had dinner. And I have so much respect for the man. First of all, people don't realize that he was such a great champion in and out of the ring that if he went into a restaurant, he liked to have wine. If there were kids in that restaurant, he would not touch alcohol. He would not have a drink because he wanted to show the kids that, drinking at your age is not appropriate. So he didn't think it was appropriate for him to drink. And he said something I'll never forget. This was early in my career. He said, Dave, if there's 10 people at the show or 10,000 people at the show or 100,000, you work the same way every show. You work your little behind off because these people may have saved their money for weeks to see you. And if there's 10 people in the arena, you owe those people the very best you can. Now, when he appeared at the Worcester Auditorium, it wasn't a huge crowd, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people. He had a 20-minute match. 20 minutes. He could have got in there in 10, 15 minutes and wrapped it up. He gave him a 20-minute match or more. It was no curfew match. He won at least 20 minutes. That's a person that you have to respect. That's a person that took his role as champion serious. And that's why I have such great respect and honor. And 25 years later, I asked him to sign a picture. I saw him at a wrestling hall of fame, a pro wrestling hall of fame in Amsterdam, New York. There was a pro wrestling hall of fame there. And 25 years later, I asked him to sign a picture. And he said to me, when I told him about the World's Fair, and he said, I still got marks on my shoulders from those damn kegs.
It's incredible. Full circle for you,
It really was.
It's crazy. It's crazy that, little would you have known at 15, you were going to be in the ring with the man officiating his matches. And what I also take away from Bruno is just that the down-to-earth person that he was, considering his standing and what he was to wrestling, as you say, just incredible. What a person. What a man he was.
He never forgot where he came from.
Absolutely.
So many of them do. So many of them would never sign an autograph for anyone. I never seen him charge for an autograph. So many of them would not today, or even back in those days, many would never sign an autograph without getting paid. And talking of autographs, one night I worked at a very poor area arena in Queens, New York, and it was raining. And I went outside, and there were a bunch of kids there that didn't have money to get in but wanted to see the wrestlers. So a number of them came over and wanted my autograph. I guess somebody said, it's the ref. so after I was feeling really great. I said, "Oh my God, I'm a superstar." And I got to the 20th kid, and I said to him, I asked the wrong question. I said, "I'm not really anybody famous. Why do you want my autograph?" He goes, "Well, you're the only free one, and you're better than nobody." Leave it to a kid to bring you down to earth.
Unbelievable. But, oh, amazing at the same time, though, Dave. Just
it
so
was
humbling, isn't it?
Well, it's kind of interesting how I got involved in the business. If I could maybe talk about that a little bit.
Of course you can.
Because I was watching wrestling on television with my friends, having a few brewskis and watching it from Madison Square Garden. I said, "Gee, the ref's doing a bad job. He's really doing a terrible job." So they said, "You could do better." I said, "I think so." They said, "Well, why don't you?" So I said, "Maybe I should." So I looked, there were no Googles and no internet in those days. So I finally found that WWF was under the title of Capital Wrestling. So I made 24 calls to their office, and on the 25th call, this guy answers the phone, and he made Marlon Brando's voice in The Godfather sound like a choir girl. He says, "Hello?" I said, "Is this WWF?" He goes, "Who wants to know?" I said, "My name's Dave Dwinell. What do you want?" I said, "I'd like to be one of your referees." "We don't need any, kid." I said, "Can I send you a resume?" "Don't send me any gifts." The answer's still no. He hung up. I said, "Well, gee, that went well. So I found out that their office was listed as a Midtown Manhattan. I was working at the Trade Center, and I saw that their office was listed Midtown Manhattan. So I go up to their office. It turned out to be a hotel. So I'm standing there in front of the hotel every day at lunchtime for an hour or two, hoping to see a WWF person. Well, after about a week and a half, 2 weeks, the doorman comes out and says, "Look, are you a cop, a private eye, a stalker, or just a nut?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You're here every day." I said, "I'm looking for somebody from the WWF." He goes, "They're only here once a month when the Garden is in town." It was kind of a sham office. "They're only here for, and if I see you out here again looking for them, I'm going to call the cops." So I said, "This is not working out the way I thought it would work out." And I kind of gave up. And then I met a fellow. I was I ended up being the spokesperson or master of ceremonies at our church's 100th anniversary. And there was a man there that was connected with boxing and wrestling. So I said, "Do you know how I become a wrestling referee?" He said, "Well, stop by my office." His office was a hot dog truck. And he told me, "You have to be a state official. You have to be licensed." He says, "I know some people that would support you since you were an athletic director and coach and you know sports." So I get a license in the mail. I filled out a form, said $50. They sent me a license, but they never let me work. So I went down and complained because I was working in the city. Their office was in the city. So finally, this guy hears me yelling at this guy who's been blowing me off. He says, "I'll assign you to a show." So I get assigned to a WWF show with 4,000 people. I've never talked to a wrestler. I've never been in a ring. I didn't know which ropes to climb through. I didn't know if it was fake or real because in those days it was kayfabe. So here I am in front of 4,000 people, and I'm going, "Oh my God, what do I do now?" Well, I happen to have Johnny Rods and 21-year-old Eddie Gilbert as my first match.
Wow.
And
Wow.
Johnny Rods helped me through the match. He liked me. He saw I was involved because I had watched 4,000 wrestling videos before I went to ref, and I watched what the ref did. So I was self-taught. I never talked to a wrestler, no idea what to expect. But what happened after that was another great stroke of luck. The New York State Athletic Commissioner, they put someone new in. It was a new governor, and he was friends of friends. And he said, "If I'm going to watch your work, if you can work, we'll use you." And I worked for 32 years after that. So I just wanted to share that one of the reasons I wrote the book was I want the kids today to realize if you have a dream, don't be afraid to follow it because you never know what's going to happen. I would have never thought it would have happened, but I wanted to try to follow a dream, and I did. And I was fortunate to work over the years with 350 named wrestlers and 45 champions.
Quite the resume.
quite the resume there as well. Unbelievable. Fantastic. So cool.
Well, I was very fortunate, and I really loved being involved in the sport, and I had a chance to work not only with the WWF but with the NWA, some of their great stars. I had a chance to work a great match with Nick Bockwinkel, because Vince started going into their territories. So the AWA, NWA, Georgia Wrestling, they all got together and started coming to New York. And of course, they had to use state officials. So I had Nick Bockwinkel against Rick Martel for the belt, the AWA belt. But what made the match special was in the corner of in the corner of Bockwinkel managing him was Buddy Rogers, first WWF champion. So I had a chance to work a match with three great champions, three great workers, and it was probably, other than Bruno, the greatest match I feel I ever worked, because Rick Martel and Bockwinkel could really work a match. You know, I felt bad at the end of the match because they tell me Bockwinkel's foot was over the rope and I somehow missed it. And people were a little upset, and Buddy Rogers was going to tear my head off, but I don't know how I missed it, but I missed it.
Oh my word, just amazing. Just Dave, honestly, I'm in awe hearing about all these stories, and the guys, you know, the myriad, the guys, the top workers in our business at the time, and you were there front and center with them, you know. Just, did you never feel the need to pinch yourself with that, or did you just get on with it? You know, you're obviously very professional. Was there any pinch yourself moments with that?
Any what type of moments? I'm sorry.
Pinch yourself moments, you know, that you were in there with them, you know, guys obviously you looked up to.
You mean, in other words, a match where I was a little bit in awe of?
Yeah. To specify a match, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I liked working with the guys who were legends who could really work. A Harley Race, I felt honored to be in a ring at the same time as him. Of course, Bockwinkel, Bruno. I never refereed Hogan, but I had two run-ins in the Garden to save him. I had two run-ins in the Garden to save him because he was being doubled and triple teams after the match. And I ran in with the other ref, and the three of us were in the ring. And I have a picture of me kneeling down over Hogan, pointing at him, see if he was okay. And I was going to take that picture and put underneath it in my office. And if you get up, I'll hit you again. Well, of course, I'm joking, but that would have been a funny caption. If you get up, I'll hit you again. But I do. After the match, we put him on a gurney to take him to the back room to go with the ambulance, and he jumps off the gurney, and he hit me with one of his pythons and almost knocked me over the steel barricades that were around the ring. So I never got to work with him, but I did get to meet him shortly after he won the belt. I was at the Nassau Coliseum, one of our big arenas in the New York area, and it was only him and I in the locker room. And he had won a belt a week or two before, and the two of us were there. And I was telling him congratulations on winning the belt from my good friend, the Iron Sheik. And the belt was on the bench, and it was just two guys talking. And I had no idea how really great he was going to become and how he would change the face of wrestling. At that time, it was just like two guys who were working together, and it was nice, but no idea that he would go on to him and rock and wrestling and Vince McMahon changed as far as I'm concerned, there were three things. Cable TV, where Vince went all over the country and the world showing him that there was more than one promotion, because up until that time, there were territories. So Vince going on cable, Lou Albano with rock and wrestling, my good old friend Lou with rock and wrestling with Cyndi Lauper, and Hulk Hogan. There's the captain, and he was quite the guy. He could say 400 words, and 10 seconds. Dave, how are you, Dave? Good to see you. Dave, you're looking good. Hi, Dave. Oh, Dave, well, you're looking good. Boy, let me tell you, brother. He was from Mount Vernon, near where I lived. And his brother was principal of a school. His father was a noted surgeon. And then it was Lou. So he came from quite a family. But at any rate, I've had there were a lot of moments that I'd like to remember. Meeting Buddy Rogers and having Buddy Rogers argue with me in the middle of the ring, pointing at him, and I threatened to have him fined by the athletic commission if he didn't stop the nonsense. And that was certainly a moment. Working the Andre the Giant matches were incredible. The first time I worked with Andre, I usually would talk to the wrestlers before the match in case I was going to be thrown out of the ring. I'd like a little notice, or something was going to happen that might injure me. So first time I met Andre, I walk into the locker room. He's sitting on a table. Okay. It was late in his career and he wasn't feeling too well. So he's sitting on a table reading a paper. So I walked in and I said, Andre, how do you do? It's a pleasure and honor to be your ref tonight. I'm really looking forward to the match. Is there anything special I should know? He puts the paper down and he goes, count to 3. And then he puts the paper back up to his face and continues reading. So anytime I had an Andre match after that, I just counted to 3. I never wanted to bother him because he had back problems and he couldn't really fall down in a match or he'd have to roll out of the ring to get up. And he was in a lot of pain. And, I felt bad for him at the time. But huge. I mean, when I left the ring and followed him back to the locker room, my face was up to his rear end.
Unbelievable.
That's how big he was. But a nice man. He was very cordial to me in the ring. We had some good matches. He never gave me any trouble.
Look at the sacrifices he made to entertain the fans. Getting around. When he was going to Japan and places. The discomfort that man must have had, but he loved the business and he wanted to be there for the fans, didn't he? But yeah, what an icon of this business.
Well, he couldn't go any place and really enjoy himself. He couldn't go to a movie. He couldn't fit in a seat. If he were driving a car, they'd have to take the front seat out and have an extended pedal. And if he's walking on the street, everybody would come up to him, want an autograph, want to talk to him. So the poor man couldn't even walk on the street without he was so noticeable. He really enjoyed, the thing he really enjoyed, from what I understand, was being on his farm. I think it might have been in Arizona or someplace like that.
Ellaby and the state eludes me, but I know it was Ellaby. Was it in the Carolinas, maybe?
Alabama?
Ellaby springs to mind.
Ellaby might have been in the Carolinas. You're right.
I think, because obviously watching documentaries on him, Dave, they've obviously done, HBO have done one. There's been various ones. Yeah. Sorry, I'm jumping in. I apologize.
Oh, no, you're not jumping in. I should be talking less probably.
No. It's about the interviewee on this show. That's what it's all about. I just chime in when I need to.
Well, I love talking about it because what happened was my real job was I was the receiver of taxes, elected official for one of the largest towns in New York State. And being a receiver of taxes is not one of the most popular jobs in the world. And I was kind of a quiet, probably a little nerdy, when I was working in the trade center or when I was working as the receiver of taxes. But when I went into a locker room and put on the blue shirt and a bow tie, or later the striped shirt, I took on a different personality, and it allowed me to become someone I was not in my everyday boring job. And that was one of the great things I enjoyed about the business, besides working with the stars. And I realized early on, if I wanted to stay around, no one ever bought a ticket to see a referee. My job was to make the wrestlers look good. And I really tried hard to make them look good. And I think that's one of the reasons I stayed around as long as I did, because, but again, I had a chance to observe for 32 years. That's why I think I could write a book to share with people. And in the book, I don't throw anybody under the bus. Nobody was thrown under the bus. There was no dirt. I mean, there's dirt in any business that I could have brought out, but why? I mean, wrestling was good to me. It paid me well. I had a chance to work with so many wonderful people. Why would I want to criticize something that, and the same thing with criticizing today. People go, oh, isn't the product terrible today? No, all sports have changed in our country.
Absolutely.
The football players, the basketball players, they're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger. So are the wrestlers. Okay. And they say, well, who do you think was tougher, the older guys or the newer guys? I wouldn't want to pick a fight with any of them personally. You know what I mean? I don't think I'd want to fight any of them, but there were some tough characters in the old days. I want to tell you, I want to tell you, there were some really, really tough characters in those days. And I mean, I was told years ago, sometimes in order to bleed in a match, if you had foreskin that was soft, they would use their knuckles to cut you open. You know, they wouldn't use other objects. They would use your knuckles. So I obviously enjoyed the sport back in those days because it was more of a sport than an exhibition. There was a lot less talking on the microphones. But I understand that they're doing something right because they're filling arenas left and right. They're making big paydays. So God bless them. They're doing something right. And even if it's not totally my cup of tea, I'll be honest with you, I can't watch 3 hours of WWF.
No, I agree. I agree.
But I'll pop back and forth because we have football on at the same time, Monday Night Football. Monday Night Football. Back and forth if the match is on, I'll probably watch it. But if we got people on the microphone, but again, I was at a show not too long after I'd retired, and I thought the fans were more into seeing their heroes, treating them like Hollywood stars, than they were actually in the match itself. Because when I worked, the first time I worked Madison Square Garden, I stepped into the ring. The lights went off in the arena. The ring lights came on. All Howard Finkel had to do was say, good evening, and 16,000 fans would erupt at the same time and go crazy about the wrestling. And it was not really much talk. The only people that talked on the mic might have been Bobby Heenan or one of the managers. And I used to tell people, this was kind of funny. I seem to always get the first match, okay, in the Garden. And I said, oh, may want to start off with a bang. Well, no. The other referees, the two other refs, Dick Kroll or whoever, were going, well, we don't want the first match. That's the longest match of the evening. It usually goes about 20 minutes. Let Dave take it. So I thought I was, but I would go out for the first match, okay? And half the arena would cheer and half the arena would boo. And I could only figure that the half cheering was because they knew it was 8:00 and we were going to start the show. And the other half were booing because I was the referee and nobody cheers for a referee. So I used to get 8,000 people cheering and 8,000 people booing all at the same time, which I always got a real kick out of.
I love going back to Madison Square Garden. I was there, obviously, for the induction of Bruno for the Hall of Fame that night. I'd been to New York in 2003, but I didn't go into MSG at the time. But it was one of them where I had to go. Obviously, we were in New Jersey because a lot of the events, Raw was in New Jersey. The event was at MetLife, obviously WrestleMania. But I had to go to MSG. Just amazing. The Mecca as it gets called, Dave.
Well, I just found on YouTube a video with all the talk about the Von Erich movie that's coming out, The Iron Claw. I found on YouTube a match that I did in the Garden that I had forgotten about with Kerry Von Erich and Virgil replacing the $1 Million Man. And I totally forgot about it. And then I just found it recently. It's on YouTube if anybody wants to check it out. I had hair and less weight in those days, so you might not recognize me. But at any rate, it turned out to be a very good match. I was a little disappointed that Ted wasn't going to be in the match, but he had knee problems. He had a knee operation. And Virgil did a very fine job in the match, by the way. And I was kind of on it. And I also have a picture of another time I worked with Kerry with my youngest son, and his cousin in the locker room, which I treasure. So I've got a little bit of a connection to the Iron Claw, and it was a pleasure to work with Kerry, who was under the Texas tornado at the time.
He could have been world champ. He could have been world champ in WWF, WWE. Obviously, I know with world class. He could have been world champ. I know he got Intercontinental title, but he had his demons, didn't he? Bless him. But I gravitated to him. Obviously, I didn't know about previously what he did for Fritz. I only knew him as the Texas Tornado when he came in. So I was oblivious to Texas and what he'd done there. But yeah, I gravitated to him. There's no question. No question.
Well, he had beaten Ric Flair for the belt, for the NWA belt. And he didn't keep it very long, and I often wondered why. His brother David, I think, was set to win a belt, and of course he passed away.
So tragic.
So they gave it to Kerry at a memorial, and I couldn't figure out why he only held it about 18 days or 20 days. And I found out from someone the reason was he was showing up late constantly at shows when he had the belt, and the NWA wasn't going to, because he had other problems, outside.
Of course.
And but like I said, I'd forgotten about the match, and I worked the Garden maybe 13 times, so I was very fortunate to have worked the Garden with a number of. I did the British Bulldog against the Warlord, and probably the best match I ever worked at the Garden. It was a 20-minute match, and I was involved in the match because twice I caught the Warlord grabbing the Bulldog's trunks. I think both of them were unbeaten in singles matches, so it made it a really great match. And I caught the Warlord twice grabbing the trunks of the Bulldog, and the Bulldog got the pin. And I didn't see it, but they tell me he was grabbing the trunks of the Warlord. So the people really popped for the match because I caught the two, and it seemed like people were just so pleased that I didn't catch it. And then the Warlord put the clamp on the neck of the Bulldog, and I couldn't get it off. So two referees had to come out and help me take off the but one of the things I loved about the Garden was the commentators on my matches were Gorilla Monsoon, Bobby the Brain, and his lordship, Lord Alfred Hayes, and they were the commentators. And of course, Heenan, right? He there was one match, and the heel was getting beat up pretty good, and Heenan said about me on the microphone, he said, this ref really is terrible. He goes, he wouldn't make a good mall cop. We have these security guys in the malls over the shopping malls. He goes, this guy wouldn't make a good mall cop. And then Monsoon said, well, the referee sees him. He's got his foot on the rope. And he goes, well, that's the first thing this ref has seen all night. So he would, he would basically make some funny comments because if the heel was getting beat up, he felt I wasn't being fair. But I loved his commentary. I loved him as a person, and he was one of the funny. Him and Freddie Blassie, I would say, were the two funniest characters I ever met in wrestling. Freddie Blassie was without a doubt one of the real funny ones. Could I tell a couple Blassie stories?
Of course you can, Dave. This is what you're here for. The fans want to hear your stories about these people because we'll never meet them. They passed away years ago. So I want to hear. Yeah. I want to hear loads of stories.
Well, Freddie lived about 20 minutes from me. I actually collected the taxes for Freddie Blassie, Arnold Skoland, and Paul Heyman's parents. And I knew Paul when he was a high school kid. I'll tell a quick story about Paul. I'm in a WWF show at a small arena. They used to appear in high schools and colleges to give the guys some, which can you imagine Roman Reigns appearing at your local high school today?
I tell you what, though, it was more close knit for the fans. So
it was wonderful.
Sort of settings. I know it's changed. I know you have to be in the big arena and stuff, but there you feel more on top of the action, surely, in that setting.
I love the smaller shows because the big brass weren't there. I had very little to do with Vince McMahon. He used to sit at the Garden in the back room in a gorilla spot, watch gorilla position, watching the show. I had all my interaction with Pat Patterson, Arnie Skolin, and whoever was the other, the chief or whoever happened to be the other agent. Well, I'm at a small show at a high school out in the Bronx, and I hear a knock at the back locker room door. Bang, 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 bang. I go there, and there's a high school kid there. And he says, I'd like to come in if I could and pass out these. I have these mimeograph sheets. I do a little wrestling. He was in high school. I do a little wrestling magazine. They weren't a magazine. They were sheets of paper. And I like to pass them to the wrestlers and take a few pictures. I said, well, I'm not supposed to let anybody in the locker room, but I said, you seem like a nice kid. You're really involved. I'm going to take a chance. There's no big brass here. So he comes in the locker room and he takes a few pictures, and he's got the Polaroid that you pull out that goes instantly. So I said, would you take a picture of me and my good friend, the Sheik? No, Sergeant Slaughter, a picture of me and Slaughter. Okay. So he takes the picture of me, and there it is. That's the picture. He takes the picture of me and Slaughter, right? And he pulls it out of the camera and he sticks something on the back. Okay. So I'm anxious to look at the sticker on the back, and the sticker on the back says, property of Paul Heyman may not be used without giving him credit. This is a high school kid putting a stamp telling me I can't use this picture on the. So when I put this picture in the book, I put underneath it the stamp that said may not be used without giving Paul Heyman credit. So I said Paul can't sue me because I gave him credit for the picture. So that was my Paul E story. But getting back to Freddie and I hit it off immediately. And I loved Freddie because he was always on stage. He was never off stage. He was always a character. So I would bait him in the locker room by saying, gee, Freddie was the toughest wrestler ever wrestle, according to Freddie. So I said, gee, Freddie, I heard Gorgeous George was a pretty tough character. Oh, shit, Dave. He didn't know the difference between a toenail and a toe hold. I said, oh, okay. So I'd ask him about these wrestlers and pretend they were tougher than him, and he wouldn't budge. So the first time I met him was at a high school in one of the worst sections of Brooklyn, burnt out cars. They actually burnt the Sheik's car that night after the show, his Cadillac. So I'm in the ring, and Freddie comes out, and he looks at me, and he looks at the audience, and he says, "This." I'm paraphrasing Freddie now. Holy shit, Dave! Look at, because he used to say holy shit about everything. Holy shit, Dave! Look at the people in the audience. He goes, they're tougher looking than the wrestlers. He says, I think we're in trouble. So I said, I don't know. And then he sees a man, 400 pounds, sitting in a balcony on two seats. The kind of seats, this was at an old Catholic high school. They're the kind of seats that have blocks between them. You know, the seats, they have a little block you can rest your arm on. And this man's sitting on two seats. Now, we used to get paid according to the number of people in the arena, believe it or not, the wrestlers and ourselves. So if you were Madison Square Garden with 16,000, you made a huge payday. If you were in a small arena like we were in with maybe 400 or 500, you got a much smaller payday. Freddie looks up and he goes, you better go back and talk to Skolin after. You see that guy up in the balcony? Yeah, he's sitting on two seats. I want Skolin to go up and make sure he bought 2 tickets, because he could, maybe he'll put us over into the next pay category. Tell Skolin to go up. I said, I'm not going to tell Arnie to go up and ask the guy if he bought 2 tickets so we can get paid more. So I said, Freddie, we ought to be worried that the balcony doesn't collapse. And he goes, what the hell are we here? We're not sitting under the balcony. We'll go home early. So that's the kind of character he was. He would, the funniest story with Freddie is this. He came into my office one day, the tax office. He came in the tax office with his gold cane. He's banging on the counter. And he says, where's the supervisor? Now, the supervisor is the mayor of our town. He's the boss of the town. He's banging on. I said, "Where's the mayor's office? Where's the supervisor's office?" And so one of the people in my office comes running into my office and says, "Mr. Dwinell, there's a wild man out here. You better come." I said, "That's not a wild man. That's Freddie." He goes, "You know him?" I said, "I work with him." He goes, "Oh." I said, "Send him in." So Freddie comes into my office. I said, "Freddie, what's the problem?" He goes, "I'm going to go in there and I'm going to body slam the supervisor / mayor on his desk." And I said, "Jesus, Freddie, you can't do that." I said, "I'll call the cops." He said, "Shit, you'll call the ambulance." He said, "Never mind the cops." He goes, "You'll call the ambulance." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "I got wild cats on my lawn and they're digging up my lawn. And I called him 2 weeks ago and he never did anything about it. So I'm going to go in there and take care of it." I said, No, Freddie, let me call the animal warden and we'll take care of it." So I called the animal warden. The animal warden took care of it. So Freddie was extremely happy that I took care of his. But he was just so funny, whether he was in the ring or outside of the ring. He was always on stage, and he always cracked me up. But a kind man. I took him a few times to. I think he was pulling a rib on me. "Dave, my car won't start, and I got to go to Coney Island. I'm doing something for the wounded veterans. Can you pick me up?" I said, "Sure." So I'd spend a day with Freddie going out to Coney Island or going places because he did a lot of work for the WWF, a lot of charity work.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be going out and he'd tell me how he started in carnivals when he first started wrestling, how he was Sailor Fred Blassie, and how when he worked the garden against Bruno, he was banned for a month because people were ripping chairs out and doing stuff and they were throwing stuff at him. And I had a chance to really get to know him, and I thought he was just a wonderful guy because he was such a character. You meet certain characters in your life, and Freddie was certainly one of them.
And they, like you say, himself and Heenan, they just don't make him like that anymore, do they? And
They what?
They don't make him like that anymore.
Oh no,
you know,
no.
They were one on their own. Well, they were two on their own. If we're going to get specific about it, just even myself as a kid, going back to Bobby, just even commentary as a kid, he was just sharp as a tack. Him and Gorilla are the best two commentators we've ever had. Some people say it's Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross. I dispute that. I said it was Gorilla and Bobby. The soundtrack of my childhood watching wrestling when I was younger.
Well, I'm prejudiced because they worked all 13 times I worked in the garden. But I agree with you. Gorilla with this place is filled to the rafters. He had certain sayings. "Oh, cut that out," he'd say.
Well, to the bread basket, the kitchen sink. He always had his analogies, didn't he? He always had that. It's just you can't teach that. I've done a bit of commentary for an independent over here, and it's hard. It is hard. I've done it. I've had the headset on. It's not as easy as people make out. It's hard to do. It's hard.
They had the chemistry.
Yes,
they had the chemistry of working together. One guy was Gorilla was the easygoing guy, and the Brain was supposedly the obnoxious guy. And then poor Lord Alfred Hayes every so often would try to get a word or two in, but he didn't have much chance with Heenan there, and Heenan would come out with some classic lines. And I did a match in the garden, Rick Rude against Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and Heenan was his manager, and I disqualified Rude for throwing me across the ring. And Bobby came in and was just in my face and yelling and begging me on his knees to let the match continue. And, it was so much fun back then because I think the guys were a little looser. There was much less competition. And the other thing is guys were willing to take a pin in the middle of the ring. There was no like guys running in and screwing up the finish.
Yeah, which you see a lot now.
Guys would take a pin in the middle of the ring and they wouldn't think anything of it.
No. It's for the good. It was for the good of the business, wasn't it? It was selfless almost. They all wanted to make money. I understand that, but like you say, but a lot more selfless. It wasn't selfish. It came across in that way.
Right, exactly. I think they took themselves a lot less serious because the time I went to a WWF show after I retired, in the locker room they had soup to nuts, You had hundreds of people in the locker room running around that weren't connected with wrestling. You had soup to nuts for Perrier water and everything you'd want to eat. When I worked, we'd go into an arena and I'd sit on a cold bench in a locker room and eat a sandwich and maybe have a beer with the wrestlers. And that was it. But no one outside the business was ever allowed in the locker room. And the heels were in a different locker room than the faces.
Absolutely.
They were never in the same locker room, and they never
Absolutely.
came up the same entrance.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great respect for the kayfabe.
Mm-hmm.
And I always went in the locker room with the heels rather than the face. We usually refs didn't have their own locker rooms. So I would go with the heels because they were a lot more fun to hang around with. I just felt they were a lot more fun. They were a lot looser. They didn't take it quite as serious as maybe the faces did in those days. Although Jake Roberts, who was kind enough to give me a quote on the back of the book, Johnny Rodz gave me a great quote. Jake gave me a great quote. He said, it takes, to make a good match, it takes a heel, a face, and a good ref. And he goes, Dave was one of the good ones. So I just appreciated Jake for saying that. But the first time I worked with Jake in the ring, he asked me to bend over and get his bag so he could put his snake in it. When I bent over, he put the python on me, and it wrapped itself around me, and I froze. There was at the Nassau Coliseum, 20,000 people, and I froze. And he said, Dave, you have to look like you're scared. I said, I'm scared to death. He goes, no, you got to be scared. So I acted scared. So I said, if I act scared, will you take the damn thing off me? And he did. So after that, whenever I had a match with him, I never turned my back on him when I got the bag for the snake. And another time I was taking a shower and the snake crawls in the shower room.
Oh my God.
And I said, I didn't want to scare it. So I said, somebody get Jake. I said, Jake, where did your snake come from? Oh, I had him in a shower next to you. He likes to have cold water or warm water running on him. So every time I took a shower after that, Jake was on the show, I would always check the other showers to see if there was any snakes in there, because I freaked out when the damn snake came in to take a shower with me. So you couldn't make stuff up.
In your defense, that would be my idea of hell. I've got a phobia of snakes. I can do spiders and things like that. Put a snake in the mix. No, absolutely not.
Especially a big one, especially one of those huge ones.
Demonized and all the rest of it, or not, like, as you saw with Macho Man, that iconic thing where, and it wouldn't let go with Macho Man, would it? But
no, it wasn't. That kind of backfired. But but again, I enjoyed working with Jake. He had a lot of problems later in his career. Mm-hmm. He went through a lot, but I give him phenomenal credit for. Getting over his problems and straightening himself out, which he is now.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable how well he's done.
And I want to tell you something. I had asked several wrestlers if I could have a quote for the back of the book, guys that I liked working with, guys that I respect and they respected me. And none of them got back to me with a quote. I think maybe because some of them were still tied to the WWF and they weren't sure what I was going to say in the book.
Of course.
But Jake Roberts did. And I'll always be grateful to him. And I can't say how much respect I have for Jake, not just for getting over his demons, but not forgetting someone who certainly he could have forgotten. But he told his daughter, mostly was talking with his daughter, and his daughter said, Jake remembers you and he liked working with you. And maybe he remembered the night he had his nose broken by Nails. Do you remember Nails?
I do. I was scared. of Mr. Kelly as a kid when he worked the program at Bossman. I know Nails well. And I was at Wembley Stadium when he was against Virgil as well. I was at the show in '92.
Oh, okay. He actually broke Jake's nose one night. When you throw a fellow into the rope and you put your foot up, you're not supposed to move your foot. He runs into you. Well, he pushed his foot into Jake's face and his nose was bleeding profusely that night. And he was probably, I would say, one of the stiffest wrestlers I had ever been in a ring with. And he didn't last too long. I'm not knocking him. I'm just saying.
No, of course. No, I know.
I didn't enjoy working with him.
I tell you what, he's doing a lot of stuff at conventions. He's reappeared. He's in the obviously the prisoner suit. He's in his Nails gimmick, and he's done a shoot interview recently as well. He's He's done.
Oh, so he's back on the scene.
He's been doing bits. I've noticed. Yeah, it's like I haven't seen this guy for years. You know, he went off and did what he was doing for work, but he is reappearing at places.
Yeah. No, well, you know, there's a phenomenal. I didn't realize until I joined Facebook how much interest there was in the classic era. I thought it was forgotten until I did an interview, the 25th anniversary of the Heroes of Wrestling. They interviewed me. And I looked online and I went on Facebook to sell the book also. I went on Facebook to advertise the book. And what happened was, it was amazing how many wrestling websites there are that deal with the classic era of wrestling. And believe it or not, this is like my 19th podcast. I never realized how many people were interested. Well, maybe I'm a dying breed. I'm 75. Maybe I'm a dying breed, but maybe there's not a lot of us left who worked with all these heroes because, as you said, many of them have passed on. My good friend Bundy is gone. So many have passed on. So many have passed on at young ages. Kurt Hennig, Eddie Gilbert. So many have died much, much too soon. But I was fortunate to stick around for 32 years. And, you know, the last 12, 13 years of my career was mostly with the independents, but with some big independents who ran powerhouse shows. So I've been very fortunate, and I thank God for that I was able to go 32 years and that without an injury, a few minor injuries, like I would get hit with ice sometime. I had a cut in the forehead, and I don't know. And also, I think if you want to hear about the most seriously difficult match I ever had to get through was the Iron Sheik and Volkov against Wyndham and Rotundo. The Sheik and Volkov had just lost the belt, and we were in the county center with 4,000 people smoking and drinking. It was a cold winter night. They had the doors open. There was 100 people outside the doors trying to look in the street. And Volkov and Sheik come in the ring. Well, they're in the ring for about 2 minutes, and I see large flashlight batteries flying by my head from the balcony. You know, the big ones? People were throwing large flashlight batteries at the Sheik, who was waving his flag in front of my face. And I said, get the hell on the other side of the ring with your damn flag. I don't want to die in the ring. I looked down and I wore cut-off wrestling boots, not the kind that were like shiny, but dull. But I wore wrestling boots because the bottoms were slick. And in those days, it was canvas. It was real canvas, and it would ripple by the time the last match came on. This was a last match. So I looked down in my wrestling boot, and there's a dart sticking out of it. Someone in the audience was throwing darts at the ring, real darts.
Unbelievable. Well, believable back then, because that was, they didn't know fact from fiction because they weren't smartened up like we are now.
And there was garbage up to my ankles in the ring. I was getting hit with plastic canisters of beer in the face, in the chest. And I looked up, and they were closing the beer selling places. They were closing the beer stands because people were getting out of control and charging the ring. And there were 3 police officers next to the ring, and that was it. And people were charging the ring, and the faces weren't even in the ring yet. Okay. So they're not even in the ring, and they talk about heat. You talk about heat. You had 100 people in cold weather freezing in the street because they wanted to see the evil Sheik and Volkov go down. Well, finally, Wyndham and Rotundo come in the ring, and I couldn't walk in the ring. There was so much garbage, and people were throwing stuff in plastic bottles. So it was supposed to be a 20-minute match. I told them in the middle of the ring, I called for a little conference, and I said, I know it's not my place, but after 3 minutes, I'm leaving. 3 or 4 minutes, I'm leaving. I'm not going to die in the middle of a ring. I said, no. I said, we got to go 3, 4, 5. So they went 5 or 6 minutes and wrapped it up. Because I honestly believed, and thank God the Sheik and Volkov did not win the match, or I may never have gotten out of the arena. So that was probably the match that I got probably the most heat ever in. But what I always enjoyed was being in the ring, knowing that 70% of the people out there thought this was real. And you had all these blue collar, middle-aged workers. And if you were a white collar fan, you would never admit it to anyone. I was at a show one night and I saw a fellow I know, and I knew the kid. And the kid I knew couldn't have been a wrestling fan because he was like a real brain. So I said, what are you doing here? He goes, oh, my father loves wrestling and he makes me come because he tells people that he has to bring me to the show. But it was the father who was the actual fan, but wouldn't admit that he was the fan. So he had his kid come who didn't want to go so he could tell people, or you'd have somebody come up with a tie clip on it says Marty, or something that says Marty on his shirt. And he goes, would you sign this autograph for my son? I go, what's his name? He goes, Marty. So you got people who didn't want to admit that they were real wrestling fans, but we're real fans. And if I could just push the book for a second or two.
Absolutely, Dave. Explain obviously where people can get it. I know it's on Amazon. It's in print form, but you can get it in digital form, can't you, via Kindle?
Right. I want people to know. I want people to know that the book is $14.99, which I think for a 300-page book with 40 photos is a pretty good deal by today. And the Kindle version, the Kindle version on a computer is $5.99. I didn't expect to make a lot of money out of this. When I retired 10 years ago, I needed a project to work on. So I worked on the book finally. And about 2 years ago, I published it, self-published, so that I didn't have to buy it. The deal is this: if you go to Amazon, it's going to say it's out of stock, but it's not. They only order it when someone orders it from my publishing company, from the people that print it for me. But you can also get it directly from the printer and my publishing company, and that would be BookBaby, BookBaby.com. You go to bookbaby.com, and if anyone's interested, you can go to Amazon or BookBaby and read the first chapter and a half for free. And if you like it, hopefully you might order it. But my whole idea of writing the book was to share the wonderful times and the wonderful stories that I had built up in my mind over the years in the ring, and a wonderful experience of working with these megastars. And as I said, no one ever bought a ticket to see a ref. So the book is as much about them as it is about me. I mean, it does have certain things about my first time I went to a show, or how I felt when the wrestlers were thrown at my feet. We were sitting in the front row, and I mentioned I knew it was real because I could see the marks on them. I could hear them get banged. I could see the pain they were in from, and they had me convinced it was real. So I wanted to share this with the fans of all ages. I think even the young fans will probably enjoy reading it. And I didn't specifically put my face on the cover because I don't think it would have sold many more copies. I think people, I might have scared some away.
No.
I think people are more interested in the sport than they are in me. And I just happen to be someone who hung around for 32 years. So that's
what I would say as well, aspiring referees could take a lot from the book. Guys that are getting in the business. I know a lot of UK-based referees as well. So I think that side of it as well, all your knowledge coming through in the book, of course, and just what you've experienced. And it's going to be helpful to aspiring referees in the business,
Yeah, it's different, I think, refereeing today. I had to help convince people in the audience that it was real. So my job, Johnny Rodz broke me in. I worked with Johnny on the independent circuit. He ran for Northeast Championship Wrestling, the original Northeast Championship Wrestling. He ran the back room, and I was their only referee. I would do 6, 7, 8 matches, and because I wanted to save money. And I'd go out for 2 or 3 shows on a weekend with them. And Johnny broke me in. And Johnny taught me things like, when you're in a ring, you're the sheriff. You don't favor the face. You don't favor the heel. When you go down for a pin, you put your face on their shoulders. You don't get across the ring on your knees and bounce up and down and bang 1, 2, 3. You get your face near their shoulders, and you count 1, 2, whatever. And he really broke me in. And Johnny broke a lot of the wrestlers in for Vince Sr. Johnny was very, very respected. People go, well, why did Johnny Rodz get into the Hall of Fame? Johnny Rodz was told, I was told that Jack Briscoe said Johnny Rodz could have a match with a broom handle. Johnny Rodz could make a broom handle look good in a match. And Johnny very often would would have a match with the new wrestlers coming in. And what would happen was he would then tell Vince Sr., this guy can do it, this guy can't do it, so forth and so on. That's why I had him with Eddie Gilbert that first match. Eddie had just come in. He was 21, 22 years old. So I was broken in by Johnny. And the rules today have been kind of thrown out the window to a degree. And again, I'm not criticizing, but guys are outside the ring for 10 minutes, both of them. The 10 count obviously is no longer a rule because we had a 10 count. If you were outside the ring for a 10 count, you would be counted out. Today they're outside for 15 minutes and there's no counting by the ref, which I understand they don't want to count them out because it's not in the script or whatever. But we had more rules, I think, back in those days, and it made the ref look more like the sheriff again. Mm-hmm. And can I tell a story? It's a little shady, but you might. And if you don't like it, this is being taped. Cut it out. Okay.
I won't cut it, Dave.
Cut it
out. I won't do that. I will not do that to you.
One of my first matches as a ref was with two old timers. Swede Hansen and Butcher Paul Vachon. Mm-hmm. Now, somebody didn't show up because they were both kind of heels, and they never had two heels in a match. So they're playing cards before the match. So I go over, and I'm a young kid green referee, and I wanted to talk about the match, and they didn't. They said, "Get out of here, kid. We're playing cards." So I went over 2 or 3 times, and they were a little annoyed with me. So we get ready to go in, and they said, "Who do you think should be the face?" I said, "I don't know. See who they cheer for." Well, they booed for both of them. So we get in the ring. Now, these are two very good friends that decided to have fun with me in the ring. Okay? They decided they were going to try to get me to laugh, which a referee can't start laughing in the middle of a match with two heels. So they decided somehow they were going to get me to laugh. So Butcher Vachon gets pulled back in the corner. Butcher gets pulled back in the corner by Swede. So Butcher comes out to the middle of the ring and he says to me, "He's pulling my hair, ref. He's pulling my hair, ref. He's pulling my hair, ref." I said, "You don't have any hair." And he goes, "The hair of my privates. What the hell match are you watching?" He said it quietly. So he's talking about he's pulling the hair of my private area. And I'm starting to laugh. I'm the only one that can hear this. Nobody in the arena. And I'm starting to crack his mouth. I said, I can't laugh in the ring. So he tried to get me to laugh there. Then they got in a cradle for 5 minutes, and I had to count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And Butcher says, "Is your hand red yet?" They were in a cradle for 5 minutes. 1, 2, 1, 2. I had to go back and forth. They tried every which way to make me laugh. So after the match, they came over and said, "You know what? You're a pretty good sport. You didn't laugh." I said, "Well, I didn't want this to be my last match because if the agent in the lockers and the agent in the back saw me laughing, that would be my last match." But they tried every which way to get me. So you had some characters back in those days,
Absolutely.
And they would pull stunts like that.
Absolutely, Dave. Thank you so much for coming on. Just so much experience in the business, and through the years how the business has evolved. The guys you've been in there with, man, that's just testament to you. And I know you're so down to earth and grounded about your career, which is amazing. It's sobering to hear about your career. And just thank you for coming on the Stu's Wrestling Podcast today, all the way from New York.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
And obviously, we'll just plug the book one more time. Dave's autobiography, Ringman, My 32 Years in the Surreal World of Pro Wrestling. Available on Amazon, but you can also get it from the publishers as well, can't you?
Yes, bookbaby.com. Probably you get it quicker. With the publisher, it might take with Amazon, it might take a week or two. With BookBaby, I think they get it out right away. So basically, I let them handle it because it makes it easier for me. I don't have to mail out books, and unless somebody wanted an autograph copy, then I would send them one.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks again, Stu. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I've learned stuff about the business, which is great. After doing nearly 170 episodes, I'm still learning from you guys, all different jobs within the business that people do.
Well, bless you for having these shows, for getting this out to people who are fans of the classic era. God bless you for that.
My guest, all the way from New York in the good old US of A, it is veteran WWE and NWA referee Dave Dwinell on Stu's Wrestling Podcast for episode 166.